The world is breathing a bit easier this week after North Korean leader Kim Jong-un postponed his plans to fire missiles aimed at the U.S. Pacific territory of Guam. Now, the cancellation of the missile launch appears to have opened the door for diplomacy. This week, Secretary of State Rex Tillerson suggested Washington was indeed open to the idea of talks between the U.S. and North Korea. We'll have more on that now from our State Department correspondent, Ching.
The escalation of the confrontation between the United States and North Korea was put on hold Tuesday after Kim Jong-un delayed the decision to fire missiles towards Guam. U.S. Secretary of State Rex Tillerson says the next step is up to Kim.
We continue to be interested in finding a way to get to dialogue, but that's up to him.
But the U.S. also says Pyongyang needs to stop ballistic missile and nuclear tests before negotiations can begin on denuclearization of the Korean peninsula.
North Korea would have to take some very serious steps and show us that they are serious about its interest and intent in denuclearizing the Korean peninsula. They would have to do a lot more of that.
The pause in the standoff does not mean the military option is off the table. U.S. Defense Secretary Jim Mattis says Washington remains ready to defend itself should North Korea proceed, after all, with the missile attack on the U.S. territory of Guam.
And for more now on the latest diplomatic overture, we are joined here in our studio by VOA State Department correspondent Ching, who filed that story for us. Thank you for that. And by our national security correspondent, Jeff Seldin. I thank you both for joining us. So, good report. What would it take to get both sides talking peace? What does the U.S. want from Pyongyang?
I think the ball of the talk is on the court of North Korea. U.S. is open to talk, but U.S. will not talk for the sake of talking. So North Korea needs to take concrete action to show its good faith. So for now, I would like to share the op-ed by Secretary Rex Tillerson and Defense Secretary Jim Mattis, which is a very good reflection of what's the thinking of this Trump administration. So Mattis and Tillerson said that given the record of North Korea being dishonest, a good sincere indication would be the immediate cessation of the nuclear test, the missile launch, and any weapon test.
So a complete cessation of the North's nuclear ambitions. Is that something Pyongyang would ever agree to, Jeff?
The view of intelligence officials is that Pyongyang isn't going to go in that direction anytime soon. They look at Kim Jong-un and how he's played his hand on the world stage. And the things that jump out at intelligence officials is that, first of all, clearly he still wants recognition. He's not afraid to rattle sabers as his father and his grandfather before him. He's not afraid to engage the U.S. in a little verbal tit for tat and ramp up the tensions that way. But they also say when they look at his actions, it's clear that he knows what, at least in this way, he's a rational actor on the world stage. He knows what his goals are. He wants recognition for North Korea as a nuclear power. And also, he wants to stay in power. So, and he looks at history. He looks what happens to other leaders on the world stage who have given up weapons of mass destruction, like Libya's Gaddafi. And what happened to them? They're no longer around. So they don't see him giving up nuclear weapons, giving up his missile tests anytime soon.
So, Nike, do you think that is the reason why North Korea perhaps blinked when it came to actually their promise to launch missiles against Guam? They obviously didn't do it, much to the relief of a lot of people. But is that perhaps the reason why North Korea decided, okay, we're going to step back on that threat?
I think analysts will tell you many factors involved. Number one, the very strong message from this administration. Any diplomacy need to be backed up by a very strong military option. And by yesterday, when Mattis and Tillerson met with their Japanese counterpart, that message is still, military option is still on the table. That's one. And number two, the increasing cooperation from China also play into the factor.
Nike, can we do this without China's help, or is China kind of integral to any kind of peace talks that go on between the United States and North Korea?
U.S. cannot do this alone. By without any cooperation from China. So what we see this international campaign of putting more economic and diplomatic pressure against North Korea, what's so different is the intensity of this campaign, the unity from the international cooperation, and the level of cooperation from China.
So, Jeff, besides the threat coming from the U.S. president, does the U.S. have any bargaining chips? I know there's war games taking place next week, scheduled war games taking place next week. Could that perhaps be a bargaining chip for the United States to sort of postpone or delay that?
Well, the U.S. is always trying to send a message with its military posture. And if you listen to top military officials, including Defense Secretary Jim Mattis, they've been quite clear. The military option is on the table. Is there a military solution? It depends on what you see as a solution, but the U.S. is quite confident that should there be a conflict, it's a conflict that North Korea would lose. Is that where the U.S. military wants to go? Is that how they'd like to resolve it? Absolutely not. The military has been adamant that this needs to be a diplomatic effort and a diplomatic solution, but they said they're quite clear that if there's enough of a provocation, if there's a missile launched toward Guam, that's an act of war, and they will do what is necessary.
I'm going to press back a little bit on that, Jeff, because Steve Bannon did this unscripted interview recently where he essentially undercut the president's military theme by saying that he sees no possible way of launching any kind of conventional military attack without seeing the loss of as many as 10 million South Koreans.
Military officials, I don't know if they'd agree exactly on the numbers, but if there is a conflict on the Korean Peninsula, it will be bloody. It will cost many millions of lives, to say the least. And that's why they don't want to go down that path. But they also want to, the message that they're trying to get to Kim Jong-un in North Korea is that if North Korea decides to push it to the point where that becomes inevitable, where that becomes really the only option, North Korea is going to lose. And the reason that they're sending out that message is the one thing that's quite clear about North Korea and Kim Jong-un and his regime is that his key goal is survival of the regime. Mm-hmm. And the message they're trying to send is if you push us to the brink of war and over that brink, you will not survive.
Nike, as a State Department correspondent, I know you've been covering Rex Tillerson since he was appointed to Secretary of State. Does the president's impulse to tweet impulsively, how difficult does that make Rex Tillerson's job?
He is being a top diplomat. Of course, his wording is very
diplomatic. He's kind of the good cop versus Trump's bad cop.
Well, any diplomacy need to be backed up by a very strong and then concrete wording, and which we never seen the tweets before. The previous administration do not use a tweet, and now tweeting become a tool to implement the strategic accountability against North Korea, and then so in public. Rex Tillerson, of course, he did.
It makes for a difficult job for the Secretary of State. Indeed. Jeff, last question. Does the U.S. have any good military options available to it?
Well, the U.S. has options. It has missile defense systems that it's been testing that can shoot down some of the missiles that North Korea has been launching. It has very capable forces in the region. They've been doing more exercises with South Korea, with Japan, to make sure those forces are ready. It's not an option the U.S. wants to use, but it's available if needed.
And I know it's an issue you two will both be covering and watching very closely next week. Thank you so much, Jeff Seldin and Nike Ching. Time now for another quick break. But when we come back, a once-in-a-lifetime event next week will have many scientists and Americans craning their necks to the sky. We'll tell you what that's all about in our final segment.